The elevator on the 9th floor of Meridian Tower stopped working at 9:14 every night. Not because it was broken, because a man named Walter Boyd made it stop. He'd press the emergency hold. The doors would freeze halfway, and then he'd sit down on the cold steel floor, fold his gray janitor's jacket into a pillow, and close his eyes. 61 years old, sleeping in an elevator. Now, you're probably thinking he's homeless, or crazy, or hiding something. Keep that thought, because by the end of this, you'll understand why one of the richest men on earth stood in that same elevator and couldn't speak. But we'll get there, and before we do, I want you to do something for me. Walter worked the night shift, alone, in a quiet building, while the whole world was asleep. So wherever you are right now, in your kitchen, in your car, lying in bed with the lights off, tell me in the comments what city you're listening from. I want to see just how many of us are awake tonight, keeping each other company. Because this story, it's really about the people nobody notices. And I think a lot of us know that feeling. Okay, let me tell you how it started. Meridian Systems was a giant. Screens, servers, software that ran half the hospitals in the country. 40 floors of glass in the middle of the city. 2,000 employees. And somewhere near the bottom of that machine, invisible, quiet, forgotten, was Walter. He'd worked there for 29 years. Nobody knew that. Nobody asked. To them, he was just the cleaning guy. The old man with the gray cart and the squeaky wheel. The one who nodded but never talked. The one you stepped around in the hallway like he was furniture. Walter didn't mind, not really. He had a routine, and the routine was the only thing holding his life together. Every night he mopped floors 30 through 40. He emptied the trash. He wiped the glass conference tables until they shined. And then, at 9:14, he rode the elevator to 9, and he stayed there. Now here's the first thing that doesn't add up. Walter had an apartment, a small one, 3rd floor of a brick building 4 miles east. His name was on the lease. So why was a man with a home sleeping on the floor of an elevator 4 nights a week? Hold that. Because on a Tuesday in October, everything Walter had built, the quiet, the routine, the invisibility, was about to be torn apart by a man in a $2,000 suit. His name was Dominic Vance, Jr., 34 years old, slicked hair, a watch that cost more than Walter made in a year. He was the founder's nephew, and 3 weeks ago, he'd been handed the title of interim chief operating officer, while the real boss, the founder himself, was somewhere overseas, off the grid, doing whatever billionaires do when they vanish. Dominic had a plan. He called it modernization. A clean word, a pretty word. What it actually meant was simple. Cut the old, cut the slow. Cut anyone who reminded people that Meridian used to be small. And Dominic had a list. Walter's name was on it. Now, listen closely, because the morning it all began didn't feel like the beginning of anything. It felt like every other morning. Walter clocked in at 5 a.m. He filled his cart. He rode up to 40. The sun was just starting to bleed orange across the glass, and the whole city looked like it was made of copper. He liked that 1 minute, before the phones, before the noise. He was wiping down the long boardroom table on the 38th floor when he heard the doors open behind him. "You, cleaning guy." Walter turned. Dominic stood in the doorway, phone in one hand, coffee in the other. He didn't look at Walter's face. He looked at the cart. "This room's booked at 7. You should have been done an hour ago." Walter nodded. "Almost finished, sir." "Sir." Dominic almost laughed. "How long have you worked here?" Walter paused. His rag stopped moving on the glass. 29 years, he said quietly. And here's the part that stung. Dominic didn't even blink. He didn't hear 29 years. He heard old and slow and expensive. Right, Dominic said. Well, wrap it up. Then he walked out. That was it, 30 seconds. But something had shifted, and Walter felt it in his chest, a cold little weight, like a stone dropped into still water. He'd survived a lot of bosses, 9 to be exact. He'd survived layoffs, buyouts, 2 floods, and 1 fire in the old server room back in '98. But he'd never seen a man look at him the way Dominic just did, like he wasn't a person, like he was a line item. Now, I want you to remember that boardroom, the 38th floor, the long glass table. Because in about 40 minutes, everything is going to change in that exact room. But first, you need to meet the woman who saw all of it. Her name was Priya Anand, 26, junior analyst, 2 years out of college, buried in debt, terrified of losing the first real job she'd ever had. Priya arrived at 6:40 that morning, earlier than she needed to, because she was the kind of person who'd rather be early and anxious than late and calm. She got off on 38, and she saw Walter. He was crouched by his cart in the hallway, and he was doing something strange. He was holding a lunchbox, an old one, dented gray metal, the kind you'd see in a factory 60 years ago. The paint was chipped. There was a name scratched into the lid, too worn to read. Walter wasn't eating from it. He wasn't opening it. He was just holding it, both hands, like it was warm, like it was breathing. And when he noticed Priya watching, he did something that stuck with her for weeks. He slid the lunchbox back into the bottom of his cart, gently, carefully, and covered it with a folded towel, the way you'd cover a sleeping child. "Morning," Priya said, a little awkward. Walter looked up, and for just a second his eyes weren't tired. "Morning, miss," he said, and he smiled, the smallest smile, and pushed his cart down the hall. Priya stood there, confused, curious. What was in the box? Why hide it? She didn't know it yet, but that dented gray lunchbox was about to become the most important object in that entire 40-floor building. More important than the servers, more important than the money. But that reveal is a long way off. So hold it. Tuck it away in the back of your mind, right next to the question about the elevator. Because right now, on the 38th floor, Dominic Vance Jr. was pulling up a spreadsheet. And at the top of that spreadsheet, highlighted in red, was one name, Walter Boyd. Now, watch this. Because what Dominic did next, he thought it would make him look strong. Instead, it lit the fuse on the biggest mistake of his life. Dominic Vance Jr. loved spreadsheets. He loved the clean lines, the neat little boxes, the way a human life could be turned into a number, and a number could be deleted with one click. That morning, he had the operational efficiency report open on his monitor. Fancy name. All it really was a kill list. Column A, employee names. Column B, salaries. Column C, years of service. Column D, the one Dominic cared about, was labeled redundancy risk. And there, at the very top, highlighted in red, was Walter Boyd. 29 years of service, the longest of anyone in the building. Dominic looked at that number and he didn't see loyalty. He saw a liability. He saw a man who'd been getting small raises for 3 decades, a man who now cost more than 2 younger cleaners would. Easy math, he muttered. But here's the thing Dominic didn't know. And it's important, so stay with me. That redundancy risk report? It had been pulled from the company's original personnel database, the one built back in the 90s. And whoever built that database had left a hidden field on every single employee record, a note field most managers never even opened. On Walter's record, in that hidden field, was one line. It said, "Do not touch. CR. CR." Dominic never scrolled far enough to see it. If he had, this whole story would have ended right here. He'd have closed the laptop and moved on. and Walter would have kept mopping floors, quiet and invisible, for years. But Dominic didn't scroll, because arrogant men never read the fine print. Now, watch what he does. He picked up his phone and called Human Resources. A woman named Grace Okafor answered. 50s, kind eyes. She'd been at Meridian 11 years, and she'd known Walter for every one of them. "Grace," Dominic said, "I need you to process a termination. Boyd, Walter, facilities." There was a pause on the line.
"Walter?" Grace said.
"Mr. Vance, Walter's been here since before the company went public. Are you sure you don't want to—" "Grace." Dominic's voice went flat. "I didn't ask for the man's biography. I asked you to process a form." Another pause, longer this time. "Yes, sir," Grace said, and she hung up. But she didn't move. She sat at her desk, staring at her keyboard, and her hands wouldn't type. Because Grace knew something. She knew about the fire in '98. She knew what Walter did that night, the night the old server room went up in flames, and everyone else ran for the exits. But we're not there yet. Hold that. Because it's one of the biggest pieces of this whole thing, and I'm not going to give it to you cheap. For now, just know this. Grace filled out the form. She had to. She had a mortgage and a daughter in college, and a boss who'd already fired 2 people that month for attitude. But before she submitted it, she did one small, quiet, brave thing. She printed a copy of Walter's full employee record, the real one, all of it, and she slid it into her bottom drawer under a stack of old files, just in case. Remember that drawer. It matters. Now, let's go back up to the 38th floor. Because Priya Anand was about to accidentally step into the middle of everything. Priya was at her desk, pretending to work, when she overheard 2 senior managers talking by the coffee machine. She wasn't trying to listen, but you know how it is. You catch a name and your ears just turn on. "Vance is cleaning house," one of them said. "Heard he's cutting the old-timers first. Cheaper to replace them." "Who's first?" "The janitor, Boyd, the old guy. 20-something years, gone, just like that." Priya froze. The janitor. The old man with the lunchbox. The one who'd smiled at her that morning like she'd made his whole day just by saying good morning. Something in her chest tightened. Now, I need you to understand who Priya was. She wasn't a hero. She wasn't brave. She was a scared 26-year-old who'd learned, growing up, to keep her head down and never make waves. Her whole life, people had told her, "Don't get involved. Don't make it your problem. Protect yourself first." And every instinct in her body was screaming that exact thing right now. But she kept seeing it, that lunchbox, held in 2 hands, like it was breathing. She kept hearing his voice. "Morning, miss?" And she thought about her own grandfather, who'd worked 30 years at a paper mill and got a plastic clock and a handshake on his last day, and cried in the car where he thought no one could see. Priya stood up. She didn't have a plan. She just stood up. And that single moment, a junior analyst rising from a cubicle, was the first crack in Dominic Vance's perfect little spreadsheet. But here's the crazy part. While Priya was working up the courage to do something, anything, down in the basement, in a server room most employees didn't even know existed, a red light started blinking on an old machine. A machine nobody had touched in years. It was sending an automated alert, a single email, to an address that hadn't received company mail in a very long time. The subject line read, "Personnel change detected, flagged record." And the recipient? A private inbox, one that belonged to a man who was, at that exact moment, sitting on a plane 39,000 feet over the Atlantic Ocean, coming home after 3 years away. The founder, Cassian Reyes, the tech titan himself. He hadn't set foot in Meridian Tower in 3 years. He'd walked away, for reasons we'll get to, and left the whole empire to run itself. But he'd built that alert system with his own hands, and he'd set it to watch exactly one record. Guess whose? Now, Cassian didn't open the email right away. He was asleep, actually, forehead against the window, exhausted from a life he'd been trying to outrun. But the message was there, waiting, a tiny bomb with a slow fuse. And when he finally woke up, 2 hours before landing, and saw that subject line, and saw the name attached to it, he sat straight up in his seat. The flight attendant asked if he was all right. He didn't answer. He just stared at the screen. Because the name on that flagged record was the one name Cassian Reyes had promised 27 years ago, on the worst night of his life, that he would never, ever let anyone touch. Walter Boyd. So here's where we stand. A janitor about to be fired. A scared young analyst standing up at her desk. A brave HR woman hiding a file in a drawer. A dented gray lunchbox nobody can explain. An elevator a man sleeps in. And a billionaire, in the sky, whose face just went pale. 5 threads, all pulling toward the same room, and they're all about to collide. But before they do, before Cassian Reyes lands, before the doors of Meridian Tower open, I have to take you back to 1998, to a night of fire and smoke, to the moment that explains everything. Because you can't understand what happens next until you understand what Walter did that night. Let me show you. To understand what happened, you have to go back. Not 5 years, not 10, 27 years. The year was 1998. Meridian Systems wasn't a giant yet. It was a startup, 1 floor, 40 people, a coffee machine that never worked, and a founder who slept under his own desk more nights than not. That founder was Cassian Reyes, 29 years old back then, broke, brilliant, terrified. He'd bet everything on one thing, a bank of servers in a back room that held the only copy of the software his whole company was built on. No cloud back then, no backup in some far-off data center, just those machines, humming, blinking, holding the future of 40 families in their circuits. And Cassian had one employee whose entire job was to keep that room alive. A maintenance man, 34 years old, big hands, quiet voice. His name was Walter Boyd. Now, Walter wasn't an engineer. He didn't write code. But he understood machines the way some people understand music. He could hear when a cooling fan was about to die. He could smell when a wire was running too hot. He'd wired that whole server room himself, on weekends, for extra pay, because Cassian couldn't afford a real contractor. Walter knew that room better than anyone alive. Which is why, on the night of March 3rd, 1998, at 11:40 p.m., Walter was the only one still in the building when it happened. He smelled it first, before any alarm. That sharp electric burning, the smell of insulation cooking. He ran to the server room, and when he opened the door, the wall behind the main server bank was on fire. Orange, climbing, hungry. An old junction box had shorted. The flames were maybe 4 feet from the machines, getting closer every second. Now here's where most people run. Any sane person runs. You get out. You call the fire department. You save yourself. Machines can be replaced. You can't. But Walter didn't think about the machines as machines. He thought about the 40 families. He thought about Cassian, this desperate young man who'd shaken his hand and said, "Walter, I can't pay you what you're worth, but I promise I'll never forget who was here at the start." And Walter thought, if these servers burn, all of it's gone. The company, the jobs, the kid's whole dream. So Walter did something no one should ever do. He grabbed the fire extinguisher off the wall. He emptied it on the flames, bought himself maybe 10 seconds. And then, when the extinguisher ran dry and the fire started climbing again, he did the unthinkable. He started pulling the servers out, by hand, ripping cables, hauling those heavy machines through the smoke, one at a time, out into the hallway, away from the flames. The smoke got thick. His lungs started to close. He couldn't see. But he kept going back in. One more, one more, one more. By the time the fire department arrived, 9 minutes later, the fire was out. A neighbor had called it in, and they found Walter collapsed in the hallway, on his hands and knees, next to 7 servers he'd dragged out with his bare hands. His palms were burned, 2nd degree, both hands. His lungs were full of smoke. He'd wrapped his own jacket around the last server to smother a spark. He'd saved every single machine. He'd saved the company. He'd saved Cassian Reyes's entire life. And here's the part that breaks my heart every time. When the paramedics loaded Walter into the ambulance, one of them asked him, "Sir, why didn't you just get out? It's just a bunch of computers." And Walter, coughing, barely able to speak, his hands wrapped in white gauze, looked up and said, "Because he trusted me to watch it, and a man's only worth is whether he keeps his word." Now, sit with that for a second, because that one sentence, "a man's only worth is whether he keeps his word," that's the whole story. That's the thing Dominic Vance in his $2,000 suit would never in a million years understand. Cassian understood it, though. Cassian was on a red-eye flight home from a failed investor meeting when it happened. His phone had died. He landed at 6 a.m., turned it on, and it exploded with messages. Fire, building, Boyd, hospital. He didn't even go home. He went straight to the burn ward, and he found Walter sitting up in a hospital bed, both hands bandaged like a boxer, watching a tiny TV bolted to the ceiling. Cassian stood in that doorway and he couldn't speak. This man, this employee he could barely afford to pay, had run into a fire for him, had burned his own hands, for a company that wasn't even his, for a dream that wasn't even his. Cassian walked to the bed. He sat down, and this hard, ambitious, exhausted young man, he cried. "Why?" Cassian whispered. "Why would you do that?" And Walter smiled, through the pain, through the exhaustion, and he said the thing Cassian would remember for the rest of his life. "You told me I was here at the start, so I stayed till the end of the fire. That's all." Cassian made 3 promises in that hospital room, and I want you to remember all 3, because every single one of them is about to come back. First promise. You will have a job here for as long as this company exists, no matter what, no matter who runs it. Second promise. I will never let anyone erase what you did. And the third, Cassian took a small gray lunchbox off the side table. It was Walter's, dented, old. The one Walter carried his sandwiches in every single day. It had gotten scorched in the fire, the paint chipped and blackened on one corner. Cassian picked it up. He took out a marker, and on the lid he scratched 2 words deep into the metal. Then he handed it back and said the third promise. Whatever's inside this, whatever matters most to you, I'll make sure it's never taken from you, not by anyone. Now, you've been waiting to know what's in that lunchbox since the very first minute of this story. I'm not going to tell you yet, but I'll tell you this. It's not money. It's not a document. It's not treasure. It's something so much bigger and so much smaller. And when you finally see what's inside, I think some of you are going to have to pause this and just breathe for a second. But hold on, we've got a long way to go. Because here's the tragedy. That was 1998. Cassian kept those promises for years. Walter got raises. Walter got protected. Cassian personally added that hidden note to Walter's file. Do not touch, CR, so that no future manager could ever fire him. But then something happened to Cassian, 3 years ago. Something that made him walk away from the company entirely. Something that broke him. We'll get to that too. And when Cassian left, The people who remembered 1998 started to disappear. Retired, moved on, passed away. The story of the fire faded into an old rumor almost nobody believed, until the only people left who knew the truth were three. Grace, in HR, with a file in her drawer. Walter himself, who never told a soul. And Cassian Reyes, 39,000 feet in the air, staring at a name on his phone, feeling 27 years of guilt crash down on him all at once. Because Cassian had made 3 promises, and he just realized, in that airplane seat, that by disappearing, by walking away, he'd almost let all 3 of them be broken. He looked out the window at the clouds, and he made a decision. Let me tell you what he did the moment that plane touched the ground. The plane landed at 2:47 p.m. Cassian Reyes didn't wait for the jet bridge. He was up before the seatbelt light went off, phone in hand, thumbs moving. He tried to call the building, his own building. But here's the strange part. His access codes didn't work anymore. 3 years gone. The system had auto-expired his credentials. To Meridian's front desk, to its security, to its keycard readers, Cassian Reyes was a stranger. The most powerful man in the company's history couldn't get through his own front door. And that little detail, remember it, is going to matter more than you think. Now, while Cassian was fighting through airport traffic, trying to reach a company that had forgotten he existed, back at Meridian Tower, the clock had run out on Walter Boyd. Let me take you there. It was 3:15 p.m. Walter had come in early for his shift, like always. He was in the 3rd-floor supply room, refilling his cart, humming a little, some old song only he knew. And that's where Dominic found him. But Dominic didn't come alone. That's the part that still makes people sick when they hear it. He could have done it privately. A quiet office, a closed door, a little dignity. Instead, Dominic brought an audience. See, Dominic had a theory. He believed that firing people quietly made him look weak. He wanted the whole floor to see it. He wanted a message sent. I'm in charge now, and no one is safe. Not even the man who's been here longest. So he waited until the shift change, until the 3rd-floor break area was full, 20, 30 employees grabbing coffee, checking phones, winding down. And then he walked in with 2 security guards and a clipboard. "Boyd," Dominic said, loud, so it carried. The room went quiet. Walter turned around, a roll of paper towels still in his hand. "Sir?" Dominic held up the clipboard. "Effective immediately, your position with Meridian Systems has been terminated. Redundancy. You've got 15 minutes to collect your belongings. Security will walk you out." You could have heard a pin drop. 30 people, frozen, watching. Walter didn't move for a second. The paper towels slipped out of his hand and hit the floor with a soft thud. "Terminated," Walter repeated. Quiet, like he was trying the word out. "Sir, I've been here 29 years. I've never had a complaint, not one. Did I do something wrong?" "It's not personal," Dominic said, though everything about the way he said it was. "Please." And here's the moment that gives this whole story its name. Walter's voice cracked, just slightly. "Sir, please don't fire me. I sleep in the boardroom elevator. Some nights. I know I'm not supposed to. I'll stop. I promise I'll stop. Just, please, don't let me go." The room held its breath. And Dominic laughed. He actually laughed, a short, ugly sound. "You sleep in the elevator?" he said. "In my building? That's a liability. That's exactly the kind of thing I'm cleaning up." He turned to the crowd, playing to them. "See, this is what happens when you let people coast for 30 years. They start treating the office like a homeless shelter." Somebody in the crowd gasped, not with him, at him. But Dominic didn't notice. Men like Dominic never do. Now, I need to stop here. Because you deserve to know why Walter sleeps in that elevator. You've been carrying that question since the first minute, and this is the moment it comes home. Walter had a home, you know that. A little apartment 4 miles east. But 6 months earlier, Walter's wife had died. Her name was Ruth. They'd been married 38 years. And Ruth had spent her last 2 years in a hospital bed, and Walter had spent every cent he had, and then some, trying to keep her comfortable. When she passed, the apartment they'd shared for decades became unbearable. The silence in it, her chair, her coffee cup he couldn't bring himself to wash. Some nights Walter would walk in the door and the emptiness would hit him so hard he couldn't breathe. So on those nights, the bad nights, he didn't go home. He stayed at work. And the boardroom elevator on the 9th floor? It was the one place in that whole giant building where Ruth had once visited him, years ago, on their anniversary. She'd surprised him with dinner. They'd ridden that elevator up together, laughing, and she'd said, "One day this whole company's going to be huge, Walter, and you'll be able to say you were here for all of it." That elevator was the last place Ruth had ever been happy with him. So when the grief got too big to hold, Walter went to the only place that still felt like her. He didn't sleep in an elevator because he was homeless. He slept there because he missed his wife. And Dominic Vance had just called it a homeless shelter in front of 30 people and laughed. Now do you understand? That's the villain. Not evil, exactly, just empty. A man who could look at the most loyal, most loving heart in that entire building and see nothing but a line item to delete. Back to the room. Walter didn't argue. He didn't cry, not there, not in front of everyone. He just nodded, slowly, and bent down to pick up the paper towels he'd dropped. "Yes, sir," he said softly. "I understand." And then he went to his cart, and he reached into the bottom of it, and he took out the dented gray lunchbox. He held it against his chest with both hands, the way Priya had seen him hold it that morning, like it was warm, like it was breathing. And he walked toward the elevator with the 2 security guards on either side of him. That's when Priya Anand, who'd come down 3 floors just to see if the rumor was true, pushed through the crowd. "Wait," she said. "Wait, this isn't right." Dominic turned. "Excuse me?" Priya's voice was shaking. She was terrified. Everything she'd ever been taught screamed at her to sit down, shut up, protect herself. But she thought about her grandfather, and the plastic clock, and the crying in the car. 29 years, she said. "You can't just... He gave you 29 years and you're laughing at him? In front of everyone?" The room turned to look at her, this tiny junior analyst nobody knew. Dominic's eyes narrowed. "And you are?" "Priya Anand, Analytics." "Well, Priya Anand from Analytics?" Dominic smiled, cold. "Would you like to be next?" The threat hung in the air. And here's the thing. Priya had a mountain of student debt. She had rent due in 9 days. She had a mother back home who bragged to the neighbors about her daughter's fancy job in the city. She had everything to lose. She opened her mouth, and that's the exact moment. The elevator doors on the far wall slid open, and a man stepped out. Nobody recognized him at first. He was tired-looking, rumpled suit, 3 days of stubble. He'd talked his way past a confused security desk by showing an old expired key card and a driver's license. But Grace Okafor, who'd come down from HR because she couldn't stand to just sit at her desk while this happened, Grace saw his face, and her hand flew to her mouth. Because Grace was one of only 3 people in that building who'd been there long enough to know exactly who this stranger was. "Oh my God," she whispered. "It's him." The man's eyes swept across the room, past the crowd, past Dominic, past Priya. and they landed on one thing: an old man holding a dented gray lunchbox against his chest, flanked by 2 security guards. The stranger went completely still, and when he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet the whole room had to lean in to hear it. "Walter, let me tell you what happened next, because this is the part that left the entire staff in tears." "Walter?" The name came out of the stranger's mouth like a prayer. Walter Boyd turned toward the voice, and for a second, just a second, the old man's face didn't understand what it was seeing. Then it did. The lunchbox nearly slipped from his hands. "Mr. Reyes?" Walter whispered, and the whole room, 30 people, plus Dominic, plus 2 security guards, plus Priya, plus Grace, every single one of them froze. Because most of them had never seen Cassian Reyes in the flesh. To them, he was a name on the building, a photo in the lobby, a legend who'd vanished 3 years ago and never came back. But here he was, standing in the flesh, rumpled, unshaven, home. Dominic recovered first. He plastered on a smile and stepped forward with his hand out. "Uncle Cassian, what a surprise. We didn't know you were. I would have prepared the executive floor, I would have." Cassian didn't shake his hand. He didn't even look at him. He walked. Right past Dominic. Right past the outstretched hand, like it wasn't even there. Slow, steady steps across the break room floor, his eyes locked on one man and one man only. He stopped in front of Walter. And then the tech titan, the billionaire, the founder, the man whose name was carved into the side of a 40-story building, did something nobody in that room was ready for. He got down, onto one knee, in front of the janitor. A gasp went through the crowd. Somebody dropped a coffee cup. Cassian knelt in front of Walter Boyd, and he reached out with both hands, and he gently, so gently, took Walter's hands in his own. He turned them over, and he looked at the palms, at the old scars, the burn scars. Faded now, 27 years old, but still there, still visible. Cassian ran his thumb across them, and his voice broke. "You still have them," he said. "They never really went away," Walter said softly. "And here's the response, the one the title promised you, the instant response that left the staff in tears." Cassian Reyes looked up at Walter, still on his knee, still holding those scarred hands, and he said, loud enough now for the whole room to hear, "This man ran into a fire for me, 27 years ago, when this company was nothing, when I was nothing. He burned his own hands carrying our servers out of a building that was collapsing around him. He saved every job. He saved every family. He saved me. As long as this company exists, no matter what, no matter who runs it." Cassian's eyes flipped for the first time toward Dominic. "No matter who runs it." Dominic's smile was gone now. "I promised him I'd never let anyone erase what he did." Cassian's voice was rising, not shouting, but filling the room. "And I promised him that whatever mattered most to him would never, never be taken away." He turned to face the crowd fully. 3 years ago, I walked away from this company, and I was wrong to. Because when I left men like Walter unprotected. I let the people who built this place get pushed aside by people who just inherited it. Now he looked directly at his nephew. "Dominic, you fired the most important employee this company has ever had. You laughed at him, in front of these people. You called the place he grieves his wife, what was it?" Cassian's jaw tightened. "A homeless shelter." Dominic's face had gone the color of paper. "Uncle, I didn't know. There's no way I could have known." "You didn't ask." Cassian's voice cut like a blade. "That's the whole problem, isn't it? You never ask. You look at a spreadsheet and you think you know a man. There was a note on Walter's file. 3 words. Do not touch. Did you even scroll far enough to see it? Silence. No, Cassian said. You didn't. Because reading the fine print is beneath you. People are beneath you. And then Cassian said the words that made it official. The words the whole staff would repeat to each other for years. Walter Boyd is not fired. Walter Boyd will never be fired. And as of this moment, Walter is no longer a janitor at Meridian Systems. He paused. He's the Vice President of Facilities and Company Heritage. A new role. Full executive benefits. Full pension, backdated. And a permanent seat on the board of directors. Because from now on, no decision gets made in this company without someone in the room who remembers what it cost to build it. The room erupted. Not in applause exactly. It was more than that. People were crying. Grace had both hands over her face, tears streaming. Younger employees who'd never even spoken to Walter were wiping their eyes. Priya Anand was crying so hard she had to sit down on the floor right where she stood. And Walter? Walter just stood there, holding his lunchbox, tears rolling silently down the deep lines of his face, shaking his head like he couldn't believe any of it was real. "Mr. Reyes," he managed. I can't accept all that. I just clean floors, that's all I ever." "No." Cassian put a hand on his shoulder. "You don't just clean floors, Walter. You never did. You keep promises. You showed up. You stayed till the end of the fire. And that's worth more than every genius on the 40th floor combined." Now, here's what makes this different from every other story like it. Most stories would end right here. The villain's exposed, the good man's rewarded. Roll credits. But this isn't over. Because Cassian Reyes turned back to Dominic and the 2 security guards who'd been standing beside Walter. Cassian looked at them and pointed. "Not him," he said. "Him." And the guards, who 30 seconds ago had been walking Walter out the door, quietly turned and stepped to either side of Dominic Vance Jr. "You've got 15 minutes to collect your belongs," Cassian said. The exact words, handed right back. "Security will walk you out." Poetic justice, the kind this whole story was built for. But, and stay with me, because this is important, Cassian wasn't cruel about it. That's the deeper truth the whole thing turns on. He didn't laugh at Dominic. He didn't play to the crowd. He walked over to his nephew, lowered his voice so only Dominic could hear, and said something quiet. Nobody else heard it. But Priya, who was closest, caught 3 words. "Your father would." And whatever Cassian said, Dominic's face crumpled. All the arrogance just drained out of it. He nodded once and let the guards lead him away without a word. We'll come back to what Cassian whispered, because there's a reason Cassian walked away from this company 3 years ago. And it has everything to do with Dominic's father, Cassian's own brother. That's a wound we haven't opened yet. But first, the lunchbox. Because after the room settled, after the tears, after Dominic was gone, Cassian turned back to Walter, and he looked down at that dented gray box held against the old man's chest, the one he'd scratched 2 words into 27 years ago in a hospital room. "You still carry it," Cassian said softly. "Every day?" Walter nodded. "Every day." "Walter." Cassian's voice was barely there now. "What did you finally put in it? All these years you never told me. You said you'd know when the time was right." And Walter looked around the room, at Grace, at Priya, at all these strangers who'd just wept for him. And he said, I think the time might be right." He set the lunchbox down on the break room table, and with hands that were shaking, those scarred, worn, beautiful hands, Walter Boyd reached for the latch. For the first time in front of anyone, he opened the box. Let me tell you what was inside. The latch clicked. Walter lifted the lid of the dented gray lunchbox, and the whole room leaned in, because by now everyone had heard the whispers. The old man who carried a box he never opened held it like it was breathing. 27 years. What could possibly be inside? Money? A will? A secret worth a fortune? No. Inside that box were photographs. Dozens of them. Small, faded, curled at the edges. And on top of the stack, the first thing anyone saw was a photo of a woman. Ruth. Young Ruth in a yellow dress, laughing at something just off camera, her hand raised like she was waving the photographer away. Under it, another. Ruth and Walter on their wedding day, him in a suit that didn't quite fit, her in a dress her own mother had sewn. Both of them impossibly young, impossibly happy. Another, Ruth holding a baby that, the room would learn, didn't live past its first month. The only photo they ever took. And then the photos changed. They got newer and stranger, because they were photos of the building, Meridian Tower, but not the finished tower, the empty lot it was built on. Then the foundation being poured, then the first floor, the 10th, the 20th, year after year after year. Walter had photographed the company as it grew, from the outside, from across the street, on his lunch breaks, for 29 years. I took one every year, Walter said quietly, his fingers moving over them. On the anniversary of the fire, I'd stand across the street and I'd take a picture of how big it had gotten. He looked up at Cassian. Because you told me I was here at the start, and I wanted proof. Proof that I stayed. Proof that the thing we saved, it turned into something. He picked up the very last photo in the stack, the most recent one, taken maybe a month ago. The tower, 40 stories of glass, glowing gold in the evening sun. And on the back of it, in Walter's careful handwriting, were 4 words. Ruth, look what we built. That's when the room broke. Grace was sobbing openly now. Priya had her hand pressed over her mouth. Even the 2 security guards, grown men, were looking at the floor, jaws tight, blinking hard, because they finally understood. Walter never opened the box in front of anyone because it wasn't a box of things. It was a box of proof. Proof that a quiet, invisible man had been part of something enormous. Proof that his life had mattered. Proof that when the fire came, he stayed. And the staying built all of this. And he carried it every single day against his chest, because on the days the world treated him like furniture, like a line item, like a homeless man sleeping in an elevator, that box was the only thing that reminded him who he really was. Cassian picked up the wedding photo. His hands were shaking. You could have told me any of this, he said. 27 years, Walter. Why did you never come to my office, never call? I'd have given you anything. And Walter said the thing that, honestly, is the whole point of this story. Because I didn't want to be given anything, Mr. Reyes. I wanted to earn it. And I did. Every single day. Whether anybody saw it or not. Whether anybody saw it or not. Sit with that one. Because I think some of you, a lot of you, know exactly what that feels like. To do the right thing when nobody's watching. To keep showing up when nobody says thank you. To carry your own proof, quietly, because the world's too busy to notice. If that's you, I want you to know something. I see it, and it matters. Even the parts nobody claps for, especially those parts. Now, I promised you I'd explain something. 2 things, actually. And I keep my promises, just like Walter. First, what Cassian whispered to Dominic. And second, why Cassian walked away from his own company 3 years ago. They're the same story. See, Dominic's father, Cassian's older brother, was a man named Elliot Vance. And 3 years ago, Elliot got sick. Fast. The kind of sick that gives you months, not years. And Cassian, who'd spent his whole life married to this company, who'd missed birthdays and hostages and funerals for it. Cassian made a choice. He walked away from Meridian to spend Elliot's final months at his brother's side. No phone, no email, no board meetings. Just 2 brothers and the time they had left. Elliot died 2 years ago, and Cassian couldn't bring himself to come back. Grief does that. It roots you in place. Sound familiar? It's the same grief that kept Walter in that elevator. 2 men, a billionaire and a janitor, hollowed out by the exact same loss. Before Elliot passed, he asked Cassian for one thing. "Look after my boy," he said. "Dominic's lost. He measures everything in money because I taught him to. Fix that. For me." So Cassian had tried to give Dominic a chance. That's why the arrogant nephew got handed the interim COO job. It was Cassian's attempt to keep a promise to his dying brother, and Dominic had used that chance to humiliate an old man in a break room. That's what Cassian whispered. Priya heard 3 words, "Your father would." The full sentence was, "Your father would be ashamed of the man you became today, but he'd forgive you. So I will too, if you spend the rest of your life becoming someone he'd be proud of." That's the deeper truth this whole story is built on, the one the competitor's version completely missed. The competitor's story was about revenge, exposing a villain, watching the bad guy get dragged out in handcuffs while everybody cheered. But real life, real dignity, isn't revenge. It's mercy with a spine. Cassian didn't destroy Dominic. He didn't laugh at him the way Dominic laughed at Walter. He removed him from power because some people shouldn't hold it. But he left the door open for the man to change, because the whole lesson of Walter's life is this. A person's worth isn't their title or their salary or their spreadsheet row. It's whether they keep their word and whether they'd run into the fire for someone else. Cassian learned that from a janitor, and he wasn't about to forget it, not even for the nephew who'd hurt him. Oh, and Grace. Remember Grace? The HR woman who printed Walter's real file and hid it in her bottom drawer? The next morning, Cassian called her into his office. He'd found out, Priya told him, that Grace had quietly protected that file, even when following orders would have been easier. "You kept the truth safe when it would have been safer to shred it," Cassian said. "That's the rarest thing there is." He made her chief people officer. First thing she did in the new job? She rewrote the entire termination policy. New rule at Meridian, printed at the top of every HR document, named after the man himself. The Boyd rule. No one is a line item. Read the whole file. Ask the person. Remember who built it. And Priya, the terrified junior analyst who stood up when standing up could have cost her everything? Walter asked for her personally, as his assistant on the new heritage team. The girl who'd been scared to make waves spent the next year interviewing the company's oldest employees, recording their stories, making sure no one else would ever be forgotten the way Walter almost was. She kept a photo on her desk. Her grandfather, the one with the plastic clock. She finally understood why he cried in that car, and she made it her whole job to make sure fewer people ever had to. So, every loop closed, every promise kept. The elevator, the lunchbox, the fire, the scars, the whispered words, all of it. But there's one last moment I have to tell you about. The one that happened 3 months later. The one that ties the whole thing together. And it happens in an elevator, let me tell you. 3 months later, Meridian Tower, 9th floor, 9:14 at night. The building was quiet the way it always got after everyone went home. The hum of the machines, the soft buzz of the exit signs, the city glowing through 40 stories of glass. And the elevator doors opened. But this time, Walter Boyd wasn't alone. And this time, he wasn't sleeping on the floor. He was standing, in a suit, a real one, tailored, the first one he'd ever owned. Because Walter Boyd was a vice president now, board member. His name was on a plaque in the lobby, right next to the founders, under 3 words Cassian had insisted on. He stayed. But Walter still came to the 9th floor at 9:14, old habits. And honestly, he still missed Ruth just as much. That doesn't go away because your title changes. Grief doesn't read business cards. Except tonight, he had company. Cassian Reyes stood beside him in that elevator, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He passed one to Walter. "You know," Cassian said, "I used to wonder why you came up here. Now I get it. This was hers." "This was hers," Walter agreed. They stood in that halted elevator, 2 old men sipping coffee, looking out at a company that a fire almost took 27 years ago. A company 2 grieving men had, in their own broken ways, given their whole lives to. "Can I tell you something?" Cassian said. "Always. That night in the hospital, when you told me a man's only worth is whether he keeps his word." Cassian looked down at his coffee. "I built this entire company trying to live up to that one sentence. From a janitor. You never knew that, did you?" Walter smiled. "No, I didn't." "Well, now you do." And Walter reached into his jacket, the fancy new jacket, and pulled out one small photograph, the newest one, taken that very morning. The tower, glowing gold. On the back, in his careful handwriting, 4 new words. He handed it to Cassian. It said, "We kept it, Ruth." The 2 of them stood there, and they didn't say anything else. They didn't need to. The doors stayed open, the city kept glowing, and for the first time in a very long time, neither man felt alone. Now, before I let you go tonight, I want to talk to you. Not the story. You. Because I don't think this was ever really a story about a billionaire, or a company, or a fire. I think it was a story about the Walters, the people who show up, the ones nobody thanks, the mom who works the double shift and never complains, the dad who fixes everything in the house and never asks for credit, the night shift worker cleaning an office no one will ever notice is clean, the grandparent who gave 30 years to a job and got a plastic clock and a handshake. Maybe that's someone you know. Maybe it's you. And if it is you, if you're someone who keeps your word when no one's watching, who carries your own quiet proof that your life has mattered, then I want you to hear this from me right now. I see you. What you do matters. Even the parts nobody claps for. Especially those parts. You don't need a boardroom to have worth. You don't need a title or a spreadsheet or a billionaire to kneel in front of you. Your worth was never in their hands. It was in yours the whole time, in the showing up, in the staying, in the keeping of your word. So here's the only thing I'll ask you tonight. It's not to subscribe, it's not to like. It's this. Somewhere in your life, there's a Walter. Someone who's been showing up quietly for years without a thank you. Maybe it's a parent, a coworker, a friend. Maybe it's the person who raised you. Before you go to sleep tonight, reach out to them. One message, one call. Just tell them you noticed. Tell them their staying mattered. Because here's the truth this whole story turns on. Most people never get the billionaire in the break room. Most Walters never hear that they mattered. But you can be that moment for someone. Tonight, for free, in about 30 seconds. So tell me down in the comments, who's your Walter? The person in your life who showed up, quietly, when it counted. Say their name. Let's fill this comment section with the people the world forgot to thank. I'll be reading every single one. And wherever you're listening from tonight, your kitchen, your car, lying in the dark trying to sleep, thank you for staying with me all the way to the end of this one. You stayed till the end of the fire, just like Walter would have. Good night.